Okay, so welcome guys to the next video. In this video we are going to learn about the reduce helper. It is a bit more complicated than the rest, but it is also one of the most flexible one. So to get started, let's start off with some easy examples, but just a heads up, in this video we're going to do a little bit more examples, because I really want to make sure that I explain the reducer helper as best as I could, because it is not like the easiest one of them. So to get started, let's start with a simple example of us having an array of numbers and we want to basically like sum them up. So that is really easy example to do. I'm sure you can already imagine. So classical JS example. Okay, let me zoom in. So first off, we're going to create an array of numbers. Let's put numbers like from 1 to 10, like something like this. And now we want to sum them up, so let's create a new variable that will hold their sum. Let's call it sum and let's initialize it to 0. Okay, so now let's simply use a for loop. So we are going to do a for, we're going to have variable I equals to 0. As long as I is less than numbers.length, we want to increment the I. And then what we want to do is to use this sum variable and to basically do this. But of course we can use the shorthand notation for this, which is plus equals. So basically we're going to iterate through this array, we're going to pick one number at a time, and then we're going to sum that up with whatever is already stored in the sum variable. So now I can console log sum here, and as always I'm using node for this, but of course you don't have to at all. The point of these videos isn't node at all, it is just like what I'm used to and what enables me to quickly like put these videos up, so I don't have to use like Chrome browser or things like that. I prefer this environment, but as I've said it like numerous times, feel free to use anything that you want. The main focus is here what's written. Okay, so I'm going to use node and then the file name, and as we can see we get a sum of 55. Now let's do this using the reduce. Let me comment out all of this. Okay, so how can we do that? Well, as with any other helper, we are going to start with typing the array name, but first off I need to copy these two pieces here, and I'm going to use const for the numbers. I can't really use const here because this variable will get used and reused and stuff like that, so it's not really a constant, so I'm going to use let for this. Then what I need to do is, like I was saying, I need to use this array, and then we have a function called reduce. Okay, then this function again expects an anonymous function or a so-called iterator function, so let's provide one. Okay, and this is where the difference between the reduce and any other helper that we've dealt with so far shows. So first of all, this function here will actually receive two parameters. So far, if I'm not mistaken, every single one of them had just a single parameter inside of here, but this time there will be two. So the first parameter is what we're going to call sum for now. So let's call this sum and I'll explain it, just wait a bit. So we have a sum here, and then we also have a current number. Now this second part isn't that confusing, because like as with any other helper, this will pretty much be any one of these at a time, but this sum is what's different. And also, like, we not only have to provide this function, but we also have to provide additional argument to this reduce function. So here I'm going to put a comma, and then I need to provide and actually Visual Studio Code helped us here, we need to provide initial value. So when it comes to the summing things up, the initial value should be 0, as we can see from here. So I'm going simply to put 0 here. And then inside of this reduce function, we need to return basically sum plus number. And this will all of this will produce a value that we're looking for. So let me just do that, and then I'll explain it some more. So, and just looking now at this, we totally don't need this one. This is what's going to be done by the reduce. So let's create a new variable over here and assign the contents to the reduce. And now in fact we can use const here. And let me console.log this out. Okay, and now let me start this, and we see the same thing. So what happens is over here is something that we call initial value. So when the reduce starts, it takes two parameters. One of them is the initial value, which in our case is equal to 0, and the second is current element, which in our case is equal to 1. So we have this. Okay, then the reduce comes inside, and the initial value is also mapped to this sum over here. So what reduce does is then it goes and pretty much does 0 plus 1, because initial value, also known as sum in this example, and the current element, also known as number in this example, so it pretty much then just sums those two values and stores the results of that action again in a variable called sum. So in the next cycle, the sum over here is going to contain the 0 plus 1, which is equal to 1, and the current element is equal to the number 2. And then it will do the same thing, so it will do like the sum plus the number, sum plus the number, that here means 1 plus 2, and then it will assign the results of 1 plus 2 to again our variable over here called sum, so that then it will be like sum equals 1 plus 2, and that equals to 3. Current element will be equal to 3 as well, so right now it does 3 plus 3. So the reason why it's a bit confusing is because just like in the first step, this sum variable over here equals this value over here that you provide, but in any other step after the first one, the sum variable over here equals the result of this action over here. So I hope that wasn't too confusing. We'll do some more examples, so by the repetition that will stick some more. So in the second example, let's do the multiplication. So we'll have again a similar idea. We have an array of numbers and we want to multiply them together. So I'm going to first of all do a classical JS example. I'm going to note that this was ES6 plus a reduce helper. So in the classical JS example, we are going to create a new array called numbers, like this. Let's put numbers like 5, 10, 15 and 20, just to make it a bit different, and let's call this variable product. Now we can't really initialize this to 0, because if you think about it, in our for loop, 0 would be multiplied by the first element, so that would result in 0, and then the 0 will be multiplied with next element, so we will basically keep getting zeros. So we need to assign this, initialize this to 1, like this. Now let's use for loop, so we are going to have var I equals 0, as long as I is less than numbers dot length I plus plus. Okay, and now we really want to do a similar thing, so we're going to go product equals product times numbers at position I, and of course as before we can short this into this, and let's console.log the contents of the product variable like this, and see what we get. We get this nice huge number over there. Okay, so now let's do this with the reduce helper. I would encourage you, if you want, to pause this video now and maybe try to do it alone, because that would be like really cool thing to see if you can do it. And if not, then you can watch me do it, and then you will learn better, because you'll see what you messed up and wouldn't just blindly follow me. But if you're unsure, let's do that together. So I'm going to note that this is ES6 plus reduce helper. Okay, now let me copy this array over here. Let me turn that into a const. And now what we want to do? Well, we want again to use that reduce helper on the numbers array. Okay, remember, reduce helper expects two arguments. First of them is that anonymous or iterator function that you are already used to, and the second one is that initial value. So let's provide them. This function over here, let's call it product, and number here also works because it will be like number at any given time. And for the initial value, you might be tempted to go with 0, but as I explained here, we really want to start with 1, because 0 multiplied with anything will result in 0, so that wouldn't really work. So we want 1 over here, and then I'm pretty sure you can guess what's going to go inside of here. So we're going to go product times number. So at first it will take the 5, it will read this product from the initial value, and that will result in 1 times 5. That equals 5, and then that gets stored in the product variable over here. So in the next iteration, the product will be 5, the number will be 10, and here it would be 5 times 10, so that would be 50, and then the value 50 will get stored in this product variable over here, and then the number will be 15, so then 50 times 15 will get stored in the product. You get the picture. So let's assign the content, like the results of all of these, to a variable called product, like this, and let's console.log product like this. So let's see if we get the same value, and indeed we do. So now, after these two examples, hopefully you should be getting a hang on these things. But like I said, we won't stop there. I want to go with one more example with you, so that you can see that you can use reduce not only for like the numbers, but also like for the arrays, and like arrays of objects and things like of that nature. So again, let me console.log all of this, and let me create again a classical JS example. So let's say that we have again our trusted array of developers. So we're going to have var developers, and that's going to be an array of objects. Okay, so let's say we have their name and their worked hours, so like how many hours they put in like last week. So we're going to have like name and then worked hours. Okay, so for name, let's make something up. Let's say John. For worked hours, let's say 15. Then let's have Jack, for example, and he worked a measly 7 hours. Let's have a Sally over here, and she worked let's say 30 hours. And last but not least, let's have Tim, and let's say that he worked 11 hours. Okay, so what we want to do basically is to transform this array of objects into array of worked hours values. So we want something like this. Okay, so you can see what I want. So I want to take this, just use their values for the worked hours and store them into an array. So we can do this in a multiple of ways. We can use, of course, for loop, but if you think about this, this is also like a really good example of using the map, if you remember. So that's why I said that reduce helper is really flexible. You can pretty much recreate the map helper using it. So we're going to do this example both with a for loop and a map, and then of course we will come and use the ES6 reduce helper. So to get started, let's create our new array. Let's call it let's simply call it worked hours, why not? So that is going to be an empty array. Then we're going to create a for loop. We're going to initialize I to 0 as long as I less than developers.length I++. Okay, and then what we want to do is to push something to this empty array over here, and what we want to push is basically this part of every object inside of this array. So we can go developers at I dot worked hours like this, and if I console.log the contents of worked hours, let's check what we get. We get exactly what we wanted over here. Okay, so now let's use map. You should be familiar. I hope that after watching these videos, if you're actively using JS for your hobby or your work or anything like that, that you're trying to convert to using these helpers and not using for loop all the time. So let's create a map example over here. So I'm going to comment out this piece over here, and let's start. So we want to map over this array of developers. Map expects one argument, that is a function. That function is going to receive each of them, so let's call it developer. Like I explained, that's a good practice. And then what we want to do is to return developer worked hours property. Now of course we need to store this somewhere, so let's store it in a variable called worked hours like before, and let's copy and paste this part over here, and let's check if this works, and indeed it does. So now let's use the reduce for this. So what we can do with reduce is, okay, well, let's start. We want to reduce our developers array. Remember, the reduce helper always expects two arguments. So first is a function and the second is initial value over here. But let's think about what is initial value. So up above we had first initial value to be sorry if I can find it here. Okay, so first we had 0 because we were summing them up, then we had 1 because we were multiplying them. So both of these two examples resulted in reduce creating a value for us, numerical value. But right now reduce actually needs to create a new array for us. So initial value will be something like this. You see how we here created an empty array to hold our data? Well, we need to do it here pretty much. So let's create a new empty array like this for this initial value, and now let's also fill these functions arguments. So we can call the first let's remember what we did here. We called the first argument here sum, then we call the first argument here product. Here we can call it pretty much like array, or we could even call it like worked hours, like this is our like current state of that array that we are building non-stop. So let's call it worked hours to stay consistent with my naming. So we call it here like this, we're going to call it here like this. If you remember here, we called this sum, but we also called this variable over here sum, and we call this product, but we also call this variable product. So that's also kind of good name convention that you can follow. So we have worked hours, and we also have like current developer, so we can call it developer like this. Okay, and now what we need to do, well, it's a bit different. We don't really need to do a multiplication, we don't really need to do any summing. We need to do similar what we did in here. So we want to push the current value, like the worked hours value, to our new array. So to do that, we can type worked hours to access that array, and then we can push in that array the developer dot worked hours. Okay, so now after that's done, remember you need to return something. Whenever you not return something in all of these helpers, you get the result that you aren't looking for, because they expect a return statement. So we need to return this array that we're working on. Okay, and let's test this. Let's call it, yeah, why not, let's call it like we used to. And we need also to save the contents of this const worked hours like this, and let's check it out, and we get the same thing. Okay, so now you've seen like 3 examples of using the reduce. Let me copy them side by side just to have like another glance before I finish this video. Okay, so we had 3 of them, and remember, like always, we can again use a fat arrow function over here like this, and then we have a single return statement inside of this fat arrow body, fat arrow functions body. So we can also do this. Same goes here as well. Just be extra careful here with these commas and the initial values. For this example, we can't really do this because that will result in an error. Let me show you. As you can see, it says, okay, sorry, it is complaining about these 2 lines, but if I comment them out and I start this again, you'll see that it's complaining, because so unfortunately in this scenario over here you can't really turn this into this form, but that shouldn't matter. And just to prove that turning these 2 into a fat arrow function with removing all the things that we could, that it still works, let me just copy this first array over here, so we can make sure that it's behaving as we want it to be. So let's quickly console.log this sum over here, and let me try this again, and we get again the 55. So as you can see, reduce is really it's really powerful. I can't say that you'll be using it like all day every day long, but when the scenario comes and you remember to use it, it can clean up the code and it can save you some keystrokes. So that's the same thing that goes with any of these helpers. Okay guys, this is the end of this video. I hope you learned something, and I apologize for this video being this long. The reduce helper is kinda confusing, especially when you take a look at it like the first time, so I wanted to take some extra time to run with you through some extra examples this time to make sure that you understood it. So if you have any questions, ask, and I'll see you in the next video.